I told you last week that we were going to get into it this week. Obviously, big deal in our, not just our local community, but our nation and our world has been dealing with the George Floyd death. And one of the big things is I've been asked about a whole bunch is, so John, if I'm a bystander there and I'm the one with behind the camera, what do I do? And you know, renowned criminal defense attorney here, Marc Victor, my friend, and I want to talk to you, Marc. I know you've done this in your space, but we haven't talked about it here on Extra. About, number one, as a private citizen, resisting an unlawful arrest. And is that, what are the legal ramifications of that? And what about, you know, if I'm a bystander and helping somebody who is resisting an unlawful arrest like what we had? This is a tough topic, but I think it's one that's important for us and in our lane to talk about. So let's talk. So I know you've talked about this, and I know that you've caught grief for this idea. If I am being arrested and it's an unlawful arrest, I have a police officer who's way overstepping their bounds and arresting me for something that is clearly not criminal behavior. Do I have the right to resist that arrest?
In most places, the answer is no. Period. You do not get to resist even an unlawful arrest. So in other words, a police officer comes up to you and says, I know who you are. You're Ronald McDonald. And you say, no, I'm really not. I'm John Correia. You say, no. I know who you are. You're guilty of these bank robberies. Put your hands behind your back. That's the end. It's clearly a bad arrest, right?
Yeah, right, clearly
I got an arrest warrant, a bench warrant to arrest Ronald McDonald. I know you're him, and put your hands behind you. If you resist at that point, even so much as stiffening up, in most places in the United States, this is going to be the crime of resisting arrest. Right. Now, I understand the public policy behind this, right? Because we want to avoid violence out in the world. And you could deal with this later. We'll sort it out later. But you're still being arrested. It is a bad arrest. Yep. You know it's a bad arrest. Now, a lot of these statutes that deal with the issue with the very concept that says you can't resist an unlawful arrest have this little clause at the end. Arizona is certainly one of them that gives you a little escape hatch that says unless the officer is using more force than is permitted by law. Well, when I look at that and I think about that, I ask myself, how much force is allowed by law in an unlawful arrest?
Right, it would seem zero.
Seems zero to me, so it sort of seems circular. I think what they're trying to get at is excessive force, right? So imagine back to the Floyd situation. He's in cuffs, and so it's hard for him to resist. But imagine this officer is got his knee in this guy's neck, and he's really causing him to not breathe. And Floyd decides, I'm going to do whatever I can do to resist. I think that fits. I think absolutely. This officer is definitely using more force than is permitted by law. It's excessive force. I think he's let off the hook. Now, there are areas that are gray, and then we hope that prosecutors exercising their discretion are going to say, well, even if this is on the wrong side, I'm going to give a pass. I'm not going to prosecute. That's how we deal with these gray areas.
Discretion.
Not every law or every rule doesn't apply to 100% of all the sort of hypothetical situations we can think of. To me, the much more interesting question is, what do you do if you're standing there while Mr. Floyd is being murdered by this police officer?
And I think that's where everybody is. I mean, obviously, George Floyd in cuffs on his face, there's really nothing he's going to do. And I know, for instance, in Phoenix, you know, people have asked me here, I live in the city of Phoenix, and they said, well, what's it like where you are? The city of Phoenix won't even leave somebody face down without any pressure on them in cuffs. If they can't sit the person up, they roll them into a recovery position. They're not, it's against policy to even put somebody face down in a set of cuffs, let alone with a knee on them.
Yeah, and you know, there is something to be said for sort of a national standard on use of force. There is some rational thought to that. On the other hand, whether you're face down on the ground in Maine or face down in Arizona in July on the ground,
could be different.
These are different circumstances. So we want to allow a little flexibility, right?
Yep.
Because there are things, but I think the idea is that just like when we talk about all these self-defense cases, it should be reasonable. It should be the least amount of force reasonably necessary to get the job done, assuming the job you're doing is the legal job. But to me, the interesting question is, what am I going to do if I see this situation? Because what I want to do is go over there and tell the officer, hey, you're killing this guy. He can't breathe.
And they did.
And they did. And then nothing changes.
Right.
I want to bum rush that cop, and I want to push him off of George Floyd. And I'm going to tell you what, that's what I'm going to do. And then what's going to happen is...
You're going to get arrested.
I'm going to be arrested because Floyd's going to live. and nobody's going to care about this case because I just got a guy who interfered with an arrest, and I'm going to be charged with an aggravated assault. Now,
Against a police officer.
Against a police officer. Fortunately for me, if I'm in Arizona, I have a mistake of fact defense. The truth is, it's a true fact defense, but we really can't, it would be nice to say this guy actually was going to die, and I saved his life. I acted appropriately, because now that we know what happened in the Floyd case, somebody who pushes the officer off is actually acting to defend Mr. Floyd. This is a completely justified act. But when Floyd lives, because I pushed the cop off, now I look like a bad guy. I'm probably going to have my you-know-what beat by the cops for doing this. But my defense is going to be, maybe I was mistaken, I don't know. But what I believed was going on was this cop was murdering this guy.
And I said so, and it's on his badge cam. Officer, you're killing him. Get off him.
And if the jury buys that, which they should, but if they do buy that, then I'm let off on the ordinary mistake of fact section. At least that's how I see it playing out. But you're left with the choice, the final choice. In a choice between I get charged with ag assault or I let this man die, I'll take the ag assault charge.
And I think everybody, you've heard me say this on Maine so many times, everybody has to set that for themselves. Will you be able to sleep with yourself at night walking away? Or will you be able to sleep with yourself knowing you're going to get charged and have the cost on your family of going through the charges?
Now, of course, the other side of the coin is now every citizen sees an arrest and says, hey, he's killing the guy, and they interfere with the police.
Right,
so
which of course is unreasonable too.
We have this sort of tension, right? This is why we have to have courts. This is why situations need to be looked at very carefully. Yeah. And this is why we need to have scrupulously fair trials and let the evidence come in. And we need to really protect a fair justice system here. If we can't get a fair justice system going, we can't have a civilized society. We really need to focus our efforts there.
And let me also say, I'm going to put a link in the description that I want you to read a great piece from Greg Ellifritz, who runs active response training, a friend of mine, cop in Northeastern Ohio, who said, what would I do in those instances? You're telling the cop what's up and he won't do anything different. And his response is certainly call 911, tell him what's up, get a supervisor there. Maybe go talk to one of the other cops there. Officer, he's killing him. Go help him, please. Please go and exchange places with him to not kill this guy. And then at the end of things, if none of that works, then you got to decide, because if you choose to physically force that officer off him, you're going to go to jail. I mean, you're going to get charged. And remember, you're probably going to catch a hell of a beating from the cops in doing so. And
you got a moral question here.
But sometimes, I've said this on the channel, sometimes you got to take a beating. Sometimes for whatever it is, you're just going to take a beating. Okay. And you got to make that, see that. And there are some things that I think are so shocking to the conscience of humanity that you have to step in, that you can't say no to.
Now, the officer who murdered Floyd, and by the way, I love those intermediate steps. I think before you bum rush the cop and push him off, you talk to the other cops, you call 911, you do those kinds of things, because if for no other reason...
Super reasonable.
It helps your criminal defense lawyer in the trial say, this guy thought this was happening. So you want to be smart about what you're doing. I completely agree with that approach. For me, the much harder question in this case are the cops who are standing around.
Right.
Very hard question. I got to say...
So hard.
I don't know what we're far from knowing everything about what's going on in the heads of these officers, but I wouldn't be surprised if a jury lets these officers off. And I hate to say that, because what I really want to see is a police officer arresting that officer as he's in the process of choking out George Floyd and putting the cuffs on him, saying, you know what, that's an ag assault. You went too far. Yeah. I hope I live to see the day when that happens.
We know that 2 of those 4, right? So not the officer who actually caused the death, but the 2 of the other ones were just rank beginners, just utter rookies. One was on like their 4th day, one on their 1st day, something like that. So to expect a rookie to have that much chutzpah to say, oh, my field training officer, I'm going to, tell him to pack sand. Boy, that's expecting an awful lot of a human being. Tough stuff. Decision.
And when you're talking about sort of accomplice liability, what you're really looking for is somebody who has the same mental state as the primary actor, right? So think about a bank robbery. If we make a deal and you say, hey, Mark, look, I'm going to rob a bank, and what I really want you to do is just pick me up, drop me, wait in the car out front. I'm going to run in, get the money, come back out, jump in the car, and we're gone. Well, that's a classic accomplice liability. Why? I got the same intent as you.
Right. We both knew it was
We
happening.
both knew what we were up to. If they can prove that here, then I agree these cops go down with the primary cop. But I'm not so sure that's the case.
I doubt it.
I think some of these officers, at least maybe one, maybe two, are going to say, look, I was doing crowd control. I wasn't even paying attention. Yes, I heard, I can't breathe, but I figured maybe he adjusted his knee, or maybe he was lying, or maybe something else. Or we don't know exactly what happened before. He could have said it many times. Again, I'm not trying to justify what happened here. I'm trying to get into the mindset of the officers who were sort of ancillary to this. I would have loved an officer being a hero and stepping in and saying, hold on a second. Frankly, all they would have probably had to do is just say,
I got it. Yep. Hey, man, I got him. You get out of here.
that would have been enough. That would have been enough. And I hope police officers have learned from this, right? If I'm a police officer today and see that, I'm looking for the opportunity to step up and really safeguard the people in the Constitution. That's really what my job is.
And my fellow officers, too.
Everybody, this situation could have been diffused. But where the courts have come down and basically said, look, police officers have no duty to protect you. I don't like that. I think when you undertake the job of a police officer, that's exactly what your job is. You have undertaken a legal duty to protect me, and when you fail in that mission, there should be a crime in there.
Well, and certainly once they take you into custody, then they have a responsibility. Now you're in custody to provide care.
Right. And so we've gone really far in our country, the courts have, in a way I don't like, to try to limit sort of liability for police officers. I think there are ways to deal with this where we can take away some of that limitation of liability. Let the market correct. Like, for example, lawyers. You could sue a lawyer directly. Well, that's why we have malpractice insurance. The same for doctors. They have malpractice insurance. There's no reason police officers couldn't have malpractice insurance. In fact, I kind of like that because now the market is coming to bear. Anytime we can get market forces into play, we're looking at a better situation. So imagine a police officer who's constantly getting sued personally because of excessive force. Well, if you're insuring this cop, what are you going to do? You're going to start by raising the premiums. Eventually, you're going to say this person's uninsurable. They're not going to be working as a cop. Right? We're going to have market forces involved in the analysis. So I don't like the movement in our society to limit liability or to give sort of immunity. And there are some positions that have absolute immunity, like a judge, for example. You wear a black robe and magically you're protected from anything you do, even if you acted in bad faith. As long as you did it in your capacity as a judge, you can't be sued. I think that's ridiculous. Let the judge get malpractice insurance, and let's use the same market forces to weed out bad judges who maybe do things that they could be sued for and found responsible and held liable.
So we have an entire discussion to have here about qualified immunity and about absolute immunity, which are different things, and whether or not those are good ideas. But the big thing I want you to catch out of this video, number one, if you resist arrest, even an unlawful arrest, that's a crime, and you better be prepared for that. If you step in, man, remember, you're going to probably catch a beating and have a problem legally as well, but sometimes that is the best choice available. We've talked about this, about using a firearm in self-defense. If I'm willing to be prosecuted for it because the alternative is too terrible to live with, go for it.
I think that's the test, as you know.
And that's that must test, and then I think if you follow the must test, you got it. So next video, guys, guess what? We're going to talk about qualified immunity.